The air reeked of iron and ozone, sharp enough to sting my throat as the alien restraints tightened around my wrists. I staggered forward, boots scraping over the metallic floor of the corridor, every step forced by the shove of a spear that hummed with a faint, blue current. The guards surrounding me moved in perfect rhythm, their armor clattering like the interlocking scales of a living beast. They did not speak, but their eyes, slit-pupilled, unblinking, burned with a mixture of contempt and cold precision. To them, I was not a man, not even prey, but an intruder who had crossed a line etched into their very blood. I told myself to breathe. Fear was clawing at my chest, but fear would not help. The cuffs bit into my skin whenever I tested them, leaving thin lines that felt hotter with each attempt. Useless to resist now. Better to watch. Better to learn. The aliens herded me down a hall that pulsed faintly with its own light, veins of green and violet flowing through the walls as though the entire structure was alive. It reminded me uncomfortably of veins beneath skin, pumping with some unseen heart. I had heard rumors of their fortresses that they were grown rather than built, but no whisper account captured the suffocating weight of standing inside one. Even the air seemed to press in, heavy and damp, as though the place itself wanted to crush me into silence. I stumbled, catching a sharp shove that sent me against the nearest wall. The living stone recoiled, then pulsed once before settling back. The guard who pushed me sneered, a gesture that looked alien but unmistakably cruel. My instinct screamed to fight back, to drive my shoulder into his chest, but the spear hovering an inch from my ribs glowed brighter in warning. The largest of them walked just behind me, always within striking distance, always watching. His armor bore scars, claw marks, and burns that had not been polished away like the others. He carried himself like a man who had seen battles where polishing armor was a luxury. His gaze never wavered from me, and I understood with sudden clarity that he hoped I would give him an excuse, just one twitch of rebellion, and he would end me before his superiors could question it. I turned away, lifting my chin instead of cowering. If they wanted to drag me like cargo, fine, but I would not let them think I had broken already. The corridor widened into a chamber that swallowed sound. Hundreds of cells lined the walls, stacked in spirals that reached dizzyingly upward. Some glowed faintly, revealing their prisoners. Not all were human. In the flickering light, I glimpsed scaled figures with lidless eyes, insectoid beings clinging to their ceilings, and in one cell, a human woman slumped against the bars, with bruises painting her face. She did not lift her head when we passed. A wave of despair struck me like a physical blow. This was not a holding pen. It was a graveyard that hadn't yet buried its dead. My escorts ignored the captives. Their discipline was absolute, their pace unbroken, as though I were already dead and only bureaucracy kept me breathing. Still, I noticed how the smaller guards kept glancing at the scarred one behind me. Fear flickered there, quickly hidden, but enough to tell me he wasn't merely their leader. He was something worse. I tried to focus, to make sense of how I had fallen into their grasp. My ship had strayed off the approved lanes, yes, but only to avoid a debris field. I had not come here seeking secrets, and I had not known these borders were sacred to them. Yet their eyes told me ignorance was no defense. In their view, I had trespassed. In their view, I was guilty before the first word of judgment. A sudden shove forced me to my knees as we entered another chamber, this one vast enough that its ceiling vanished into darkness. The walls curved upward, covered in what looked like carvings but moved like ripples of water when I looked too long. At the far end rose a dais of bone-white stone, and upon it sat 3 figures cloaked in robes that shimmered with threads of silver. Their faces were hidden, but the weight of their attention pressed against my skull like a physical hand. So this was it, the trial or whatever passed for one among them. I swallowed the bile, climbing my throat, and forced my gaze upward. The guards spoke for me in their guttural tongue, voices echoing. I caught only fragments, but enough: trespass, defilement, violation. Each word was punctuated by a spear striking the ground, the sound resonating through my bones. My fate was already sealed, and I knew it. Still, I would not bow. Not yet. One of the robed figures leaned forward, and for an instant the hood slipped enough to reveal glimmering eyes, set deep in a face ridged with age. It raised a hand, silencing the guards, then gestured at me as though summoning my essence to its judgment. I felt every eye in the chamber burn into me. Sweat gathered at my spine, but I forced myself to stay still. My pulse thundered in my ears faster and faster, until I thought my ribs might shatter from the strain. That happened. As one of the guards hauled me upright, my collar shifted and exposed the tattoo etched on the side of my neck. A simple spiral, black and unremarkable, at least to me. The scarred guard's gaze snapped to it. His body went rigid, his eyes widening not in triumph, but in something far stranger. For the first time since I had seen him, his grip loosened. The sneer faded. He whispered a word I could not understand, his voice trembling in a way that should not have been possible for someone like him. The others noticed. Silence spread outward like a crack in glass. Even the robed judges leaned forward, their shimmering garments trembling with sudden energy. I stood there caught between terror and disbelief as the weight of the entire chamber shifted. My captors were no longer certain of what I was, and in that breathless pause, one thought burned hotter than all the rest. Whatever this mark meant to them, it had just changed everything. The chamber felt colder, though no wind stirred the air. Every alien present had stilled, their movements cut short as though the spiral on my neck had frozen time itself. I could hear my own breathing, shallow and ragged, echoing in the hush. The scarred guard's hand hovered near my shoulder, but the iron force in his grip had vanished, replaced by hesitation. His lips moved soundlessly, repeating the word he had whispered before, the syllables trembling like fragile glass. The three robed figures rose in unison. Their garments shifted like liquid metal, reflecting faint streams of violet light that ran across the living walls. One descended from the dais with slow, deliberate steps. The other two remained above, watching, their hidden eyes glimmering with curiosity that pressed harder than chains. When the figure halted before me, the air seemed to hum. A hand emerged from the silver folds, long fingers ending in sharp, obsidian nails. They did not touch me but hovered near my throat, so close I felt the faint tremor of displaced air. The guard who had frozen dropped to one knee, bowing his head, and a ripple of unease spread among the others. None of them dared move, though several tightened their grips on their weapons as if ready for violence. The robed figure spoke in a voice that was not loud but carried effortlessly, vibrating through my bones. The words were alien, yet somehow I understood fragments, as though memory and instinct were conspiring to translate. The mark returned impossible. I wanted to speak, to demand an explanation, but my tongue felt anchored. The silence stretched until I forced air into my lungs. What does it mean? My voice was hoarse, but the sound broke the stillness like a stone through glass. The reaction was immediate. Several guards hissed, their jaws opening too wide, revealing rows of sharp teeth. One stepped forward in anger, but the kneeling scarred warrior barked a single guttural command that stopped him cold. His loyalty, I realized, had shifted in a heartbeat, not to me, but to what the symbol represented. The robed figure turned, speaking rapidly in its language. The dais responded like a living thing. Ridges in the floor lit up, tracing spiral patterns that mirrored my tattoo. Gasps erupted from the ranks of soldiers. The two remaining figures above began to chant, a low resonance that set the chamber vibrating. I fought the urge to recoil. This was not judgment, it was recognition. Yet recognition of what? The scarred guard rose to his feet and stepped closer, his gaze locked on mine. His expression was unreadable, but the hostility had drained away. In its place was something more dangerous, fear edged with reverence. He spoke, his tone heavy with meaning. The spiral of origin, he said in halting words, his accent grinding against the syllables of my tongue. Long gone, long forgotten, but here on you. My heart thudded painfully. A childhood memory surfaced, my father's hand resting against my neck, telling me that the ink was a gift, a tradition passed down. He had never explained further, and I had never asked. I had carried it like a birthmark, a curiosity, never realizing it might hold significance beyond sentiment. The tribunal's leader gestured, and the guards dragged me forward despite their unease. They forced me to kneel at the base of the dais, but none dared touch the side of my neck again. The scarred guard stood beside me, his spear lowered not in threat but in something resembling protection. The robed figure spoke again, and though most of the words slid past me like smoke, I caught enough. Prophecy, human, return. Their gaze burned into me as if trying to peel back skin and glimpse what lay beneath. My confusion tangled with anger. I was no prophet, no savior. I was just a man who had wandered into the wrong stretch of stars. Listen, I said, my voice firmer now. I don't know what you think this means, but you're mistaken. I don't know anything about your prophecy. My words made the chamber erupt in clashing voices. Some shouted with fury, others with awe. A handful of guards pointed their weapons at me, only to lower them again when the scarred one barked another command. The factions were clear. Half saw me as a threat that had to be destroyed, and the rest as a figure too sacred to harm. The leader silenced them with a raised hand. Then in clear but broken human speech, it delivered a sentence that chilled me more than the threat of death ever had. If the spiral is truth, you are key. You may unite, or you may end us all. The words dropped like stones into my mind. Unite or destroy, hope or ruin. Their fear was not of me as a man, but of what I represented, a possibility that unsettled their entire order. I wanted to protest again, to shout that I had no role in their myths, but something in their eyes stopped me. They were afraid, yes, but not only of me. They were afraid of what they might have to become if I was what they claimed. The chamber shifted, a low rumble rolling through the walls like the growl of a slumbering beast. The robed figure stepped back, and the council's voices overlapped in debate too fast for me to follow. My wrists still burned from the cuffs, my knees ached against the stone, but those discomforts barely registered. All I could feel was the weight of their stares, the tightening coil of a fate I did not understand. The scarred guard leaned down, his voice low, meant only for me. They will not decide quickly. Some will want your blood. Others will want your oath. But the spiral has been seen. You cannot vanish now. I met his gaze. For the first time since my capture, there was no hatred in it. Only conviction. Around us, the council argued, guards shifted uneasily, and the chamber glowed faintly with spirals that echoed the mark on my skin. I realized then that whatever had begun would not end with this tribunal. Whether I lived or died, I had been pulled into something larger, something ancient. And as the leader raised a hand to silence the uproar, a voice cut through the clamor like a blade. If the mark is true, then destiny demands we follow the human or destroy them before the prophecy awakens. The chamber erupted again, half in agreement, half in outrage. Bound and kneeling, I felt the storm gather around me. Its center locked onto the spiral burned into my flesh. I was no longer merely a prisoner. I had become their dilemma, and the weight of it pressed harder than any chain. The council chamber had become a battlefield without weapons. Words hissed, barked, and thundered from alien throats, clashing like steel against steel. Some guards pressed forward, demanding my execution before the spiral's curse could take root. Others stood in rigid silence, their eyes betraying a hesitation that only deepened the confusion. I remained on my knees, my body aching from the cold stone, caught in the vortex of a storm I could neither command nor escape. The scarred guard, the one who had first faltered at the sight of my tattoo, did not move with the others. He stood firm at my side, his spear angled down not toward me but outward, as if daring anyone to strike. His presence was both shield and warning. I had no name for him, yet already his silence spoke more than the council's noise. The tribunal's leader raised both arms, and the uproar dulled into a tense hum. The air quivered as the robed figures exchanged glances, their silver garments rippling like disturbed water. At last, a single verdict emerged. I would not die that moment. I would be held while the council decided whether the spiral marked me as salvation or ruin. The announcement fractured the chamber again, though this time the guards' division cut sharper, more dangerous. I was dragged away not to the cells I had passed earlier, but to a separate chamber carved with spiraling patterns that seemed to glow faintly in my presence. The guards who escorted me kept their distance, their eyes darting between my tattoo and the scarred warrior who accompanied us. None wanted to stand too close, as though the symbol might leap from my skin and brand them in turn. The chamber held no bars, no locks, only walls that pulsed like the sides of a colossal artery. It should have felt like a cage, but instead it felt alive, watching. When the others withdrew, leaving me with the scarred guard, silence fell heavy. He studied me for a long time, his breathing measured, his expression unreadable. "You don't understand," he said at last, his words halting but clear enough. "No, I admit it." My voice rasped. "So explain it. Why do they look at me like I carry a weapon none of us can see?" He lowered himself to one knee, his massive form folding with surprising grace. For the first time, I looked at him not as captor but as man, or whatever passed for man among his kind. He touched a clawed finger to the spiral at his breastplate, etched faintly into the armor. "This mark is older than my people, older than our wars. The spiral of origin. The one who bore it last was not of us, but human." The word lingered between us, tasting strange on his tongue. I frowned, struggling to match his words to sense. "A human? That's impossible. We've only just stumbled into the stars." "Not stumbled," he countered, his gaze fierce. "Returned." The weight of that word dug into my chest. Returned, as though humanity had once stood where I now knelt, a force so profound their memory lingered in alien legends. My father's voice drifted unbidden through memory, his insistence that the mark was tradition, his refusal to explain further. Had he known? Had he carried this secret in silence, waiting for the day it would matter? Before I could press him, the chamber shook. A deep tremor rippled through the walls, dust falling in faint trails from the ceiling. The scarred guard sprang to his feet, spear raised. His eyes narrowed. "They come." The doorway split open and figures surged in, guards, but not loyal to him. Their faces twisted in hatred, weapons charged with killing light. One barked an order, "End it now," before the prophecy takes root. The scarred warrior moved faster than I thought possible. His spear met the first intruder with a crack that echoed through the chamber, sending the alien sprawling. The other surged, and suddenly the room was a storm of flashing metal and snarled curses. I scrambled back, the walls pressing against me as if trying to keep me safe. But instinct flared hot in my blood. I was no warrior like him, yet I had survived long enough in hostile skies to know when hesitation meant death. A dropped blade slid across the floor near me, strange in shape, heavy in my grip, but a weapon nonetheless. When one of the attackers broke through his defense, lunging at me with a jagged spear, I swung. The blow was clumsy, desperate, but enough to catch the alien across the side of the head. He crumpled, and the taste of iron filled my mouth, though none of it was mine. The scarred guard dispatched the rest with brutal precision, his body a blur of motion. When the last one fell, silence crashed back into the room, broken only by my ragged breathing. Blood, alien and thick, darkened the floor. "They will not stop," he said, not looking at me, but at the corpses. "Half of them fear you. The rest worship. Fear will always strike first." I tightened my grip on the unfamiliar blade, forcing myself not to tremble. "Then what happens now?" He turned, meeting my gaze with a gravity that weighed more than any chain. "Now you live, and living means choosing." He gestured to the spiral on my neck. "That mark does not belong to you alone. It belongs to every world that remembers. Some will kill to erase it. Others will kill to keep it. You must decide which side of that struggle you stand on." His words burrowed deep, but I could not shape an answer. I was just one man, lost in a war of belief I had never asked to fight. Yet a thought returned, unyielding. Perhaps that was exactly why it mattered. Perhaps humanity's strength had never been in destiny, but in choosing in spite of it. The scarred guard moved to the door, his spear steady. "More will come. You cannot remain here." He glanced back once, his expression unreadable, but his tone softened by something almost like respect. "If you'd live, stay close. If you would change what comes, be ready." The walls pulsed again, as though echoing his warning. I followed, blade heavy in my hand, each step binding me tighter to the role I had never wanted. Outside, the sounds of unrest thundered through the fortress, clashing steel, shouts of rebellion, the crackle of energy weapons. The council's indecision had split their forces wide open, and the chaos would not stop until blood answered prophecy. I felt the spiral burn faintly on my skin, a heat that was not pain but promise. For the first time, I wondered if it had always been waiting, not to choose me, but to see what I would choose. We pressed into the corridor, and the war for my life began in earnest. The fortress convulsed with violence. Corridors that had once echoed only with the measured march of guards now thundered with the chaos of betrayal. Shouts in clashing dialects, the hiss of energy discharges, the metallic clang of spear against blade. I followed the scarred warrior through the storm, his broad frame cutting a path while mine trailed in his wake. The blade in my hand felt alien, too heavy and unbalanced, but necessity dulled hesitation. Each step forward was a step deeper into the spiral I could no longer deny. We emerged into a vast hall where factions had already collided. The once disciplined ranks of the guards were fractured, some pressing forward with weapons raised toward me, others throwing themselves between us as a living shield. Sparks from energy bolts lit the vaulted chamber in violent strobe, casting shadows that twisted like specters across the rippling walls. The scarred guard fought like a force of nature. His spear spun and struck with bone-breaking precision, scattering attackers with each swing. Yet even as he cut them down, more pressed in, their fury sharpened by fear. One lunge past him, blade raised for my throat. Instinct, not skill, drove me. I parried clumsily, steel ringing against steel, and rammed my shoulder into the attacker's chest. He staggered back into the path of the scarred guard strike, falling lifeless before I had even exhaled. My chest heaved. I was not skilled, not trained for their wars, but I was still human, and humanity's stubborn refusal to die had always been its sharpest weapon. The battle surged around us, but then something shifted. A burning heat spread across my neck, pulsing in time with my racing heart. The spiral glowed faint at first, then brighter, casting a pale light that turned every alien face toward me. The air thickened as if the fortress itself were holding its breath. The fighting slowed, confusion rippling through the ranks. Some dropped their weapons and fell to their knees, foreheads pressed to the stone in reverence. Others recoiled as though the light might burn them alive. The scarred warrior turned, his face illuminated by the glow, and for the first time I saw certainty in his expression rather than fear. The robed figures from the tribunal entered the hall, their silver garments catching the spiral's glow. Their voices merged in a single chant, words too old for me to understand, yet carrying the weight of endless repetition. The walls responded, veins of light blooming outward from the center of the chamber, spirals upon spirals until the floor itself seemed to hum with recognition. I stood at the center of it all, trembling. The weight of destiny pressed hard, threatening to crush me. Yet beneath it, something else stirred, anger. Not at the prophecy nor the mark, but at the chains of fear that held every being in that hall captive. They had made me a symbol, but what I chose to be was still mine. I lifted my voice, louder than I thought possible, cutting through the chant and the clamor. You think this spiral decides your fate. You think it gives me power over you. But it's not the mark, it's us. Humans bleed, fight, and endure not because destiny demands it, but because we refuse to be silenced. That's the only truth I carry. The hall rang with silence. My words hung in the air like sparks waiting for dry grass. The scarred guard lowered his spear, his head bowing slowly, not to me, but to the conviction behind the words. One by one, others followed, the kneeling growing from a ripple into a tide. Yet still, not all. Across the hall, a captain of the guard snarled, his weapon raised high. Lies, he spat. The human brings only ruin. He charged, his fury unbroken by reverence. The scarred warrior moved to intercept, but I stepped forward, the blade in my hand rising to meet the strike. Our weapons clashed, the force rattling up my arm, but I held. The spiral burned brighter, and the captain faltered, his strength buckling beneath the weight of something unseen. I shoved forward, not with skill but with will, and his weapon clattered to the ground. He knelt, unwilling or unable to resist. The hall erupted, not in violence, but in shouts of surrender and cries of devotion. The battle was over, not through conquest, but through choice. They had chosen to yield, not to prophecy, but to the proof that a human could stand against fear itself. The robed figures descended, their hoods lifting just enough to reveal eyes like molten gold. One spoke, its voice steady as stone. So it is not the mark alone, but the one who bears it. The spiral has returned in flesh, but its power lies not in bloodline or destiny. It lies in the human will. The scarred warrior knelt fully now, his spear laid across the floor in oath. "I follow," he said simply, and with his words, the choice spread like fire. Kneeling, bowing, weapons lowered until the hall was a sea of submission. I stood amidst it all, breath ragged, the blade trembling in my hand. I had not asked for reverence, yet here it was. I had not wanted to lead, yet a path had been carved by survival itself. The spiral's glow dimmed, but its heat lingered, not as a burden but as a reminder. Slowly, I sheathed the blade into my belt, forcing my voice to steady. If you follow me, you follow not a mark, but the promise that no chain, alien or human, will decide our fate. We forge it together. A murmur of assent rose, hesitant at first, then swelling until it filled the hall, like thunder. When the sound faded, the scarred guard approached, his towering frame casting a shadow over me. Yet his eyes no longer burned with hostility. Instead, they carried something unexpected: trust. "You are not what I feared," he said quietly. "Perhaps you are what we needed." I met his gaze, exhaustion cutting through adrenaline, and managed a grim smile. "I'm just human, and maybe that's enough." The fortress walls pulsed one last time, spirals fading back into silence as though the living stone had accepted its verdict. The war that had begun with chains was over, but the greater struggle loomed beyond those walls. Entire worlds would hear of what had happened here. Entire empires would choose to kneel or to strike. I knew then the spiral was no ending. It was the beginning of something vast, something I would have to shape with every word, every step, every defiant breath. And as we stepped out into the corridors, now silent with surrender, one thought burned sharper than any blade. They had tried to capture me, but it was not me they had chained. It was humanity itself, and humanity never stayed bound for long. The fortress no longer roared with combat, but the silence it left behind was heavier than any battle cry. The floor was littered with the wreckage of rebellion, splintered spears, cracked armor plates, and the faint glow of dying energy blades. Those who had opposed me lay motionless or groaned where they had fallen, tended to by comrades who now no longer looked at me with contempt but with something closer to awe. Reverence was a dangerous thing, I thought. It burned just as fiercely as hatred, and if left unchecked, it consumed. The scarred warrior remained at my side, unflinching even as the robed figures conferred in hushed tones at the dais. He had become more than my captor. In the span of hours, he had shifted into something closer to a guardian, though his motives remained shadowed. His gaze rarely left me, not out of suspicion, but as if ensuring that nothing, not even fate, could wrest me away. When the tribunal finally approached, their movements were deliberate, their silver garments catching the dim light like rippling water. One extended a hand, not in command but in gesture of invitation. The spiral awakens, the voice intoned, deep and resonant. You stand where the old one stood, where choice shaped empires. Now the question remains, will you bind us together or fracture us beyond repair? I should have felt pride, perhaps even vindication, but only exhaustion weighed in my chest. My arms ached from holding the blade, my throat raw from shouting through the chaos. Still, I raised my head, forcing strength into words I barely believed myself. I didn't come here to lead. I didn't come here to be your prophecy. But if the choice is between unity and ruin, then I choose the path that keeps us alive. All of us. The hall murmured, ripples of unease spreading like cracks across glass. Unity was a fragile promise in a world long forged in conflict. Some of the guards nodded, their faces softened, but others sneered, their eyes warning that not all divisions could be bridged by words. The scarred warrior spoke then, his voice low, but carrying the weight of command. He speaks not as conqueror, he speaks as human. That is why we should listen. They endure not by prophecy, but by will. His words silenced many, though not all. One of the tribunal's figures stepped forward closer than before, and for the first time lowered its hood. Its face was marked by deep ridges, lines carved by centuries of age or burden. The golden eyes within studied me with unblinking intensity. You may speak of unity, but the galaxy beyond these walls does not wait for words. Empires stir. Old enemies watch. They will hear of this spiral reborn, and they will come. Some to kneel, more to kill. The truth in that statement knifed through me. My struggle was no longer confined to the living fortress or even the species gathered within. By surviving, by standing with this cursed spiral on my neck, I had announced myself to the stars. And the stars would answer. The tribunal retreated into silence, their voices weaving together in tones that reminded me of rustling stone. When they spoke again, it was with reluctant concession. Then it begins. You will not walk alone. The spiral demands witness, and the witness shall be chosen. All eyes turned to the scarred warrior. He did not flinch under the weight of expectation. Instead, he inclined his head slightly, accepting the role without a word. My pulse quickened. His presence was both relief and warning. Relief because I trusted him more than any other here. Warning because his loyalty might not be to me, but to the spiral itself, whatever he believed that to be. We left the chamber together, a procession of fractured unity trailing behind us. The corridors were quieter now, though the living walls still pulsed faintly, responding to the aftershock of what had been awakened. Each spiral that glowed along the stone seemed a reminder, a question etched in light. Was this destiny or defiance masquerading as fate? Outside, the fortress opened into a wide expanse that stretched toward a horizon veiled in storms. Towers of bone-white stone jutted upward like jagged teeth, linked by bridges that swayed under the weight of marching soldiers. Beyond, I glimpsed skies thick with shifting clouds, crackling with violet lightning. It was a world both beautiful and hostile, a reflection of the people who had built it. The scarred warrior halted at the threshold, scanning the horizon with a soldier's eye. His voice was softer when he finally spoke, meant only for me. They will test you. Not just here, not just now. Everywhere the spiral is seen, there will be those who would use you or destroy you. If you falter, they will all burn for it. His warning was not cruel. It was fact, as stark as the scar on his armor. And though the weight of it nearly drove me to my knees, I understood. This was not about surviving the fortress. It was about surviving the galaxy's response to a truth it did not want. We walked together into the storm-lit expanse, the tribunal's decree echoing in my mind. You will not walk alone. Yet even surrounded by soldiers, even shadowed by the scarred warrior's vigilance, I felt the loneliness of standing at the edge of something vast and unstoppable. For a moment, I pressed my hand against the spiral at my neck. The skin there was warm, humming faintly like a heartbeat not my own. Perhaps it was more than prophecy. Perhaps it was a reminder, an unbroken thread tying me to a past I did not remember and a future I had not chosen. The storm broke above us, lightning lancing across the sky in jagged arcs that illuminated the path ahead. Each step into that light felt like stepping into a story already written, yet with lines still blurred, waiting for my choices to sharpen them. I glanced once at the scarred warrior. He met my gaze without a word, and in that silence I found a sliver of reassurance. Whatever waited in the darkness beyond, I would face it with him at my side. The wind tore at us, carrying the scent of iron and rain. Behind, the fortress pulsed faintly, alive with spirals that would never fade. Ahead lay a galaxy that had just been reminded of humanity's place in its myths. And though fear coiled in my gut, something fiercer rose to meet it. The thought that had carried me through chains, through judgment, through battle flared brighter than ever. They had tried to cage me, but it was not me alone they had bound. It was humanity, and humanity, when pushed to its knees, always rose again. The storm did not relent as we pressed deeper into the alien city, but its fury became less of a barrier and more of a chorus to our journey. Lightning forked across the skies, illuminating towers shaped like spines thrust into the heavens, while thunder rolled with the weight of ancient drums. The scarred warrior walked half a step behind me, his silence both shield and question. Around us, others followed, some from duty, others from curiosity, and a few, I suspected, from a dangerous pull of prophecy. Each gaze pressed into my back, not with the malice of before, but with expectation so heavy it threatened to crush me. The spiral at my neck burned as though alive, its warmth flaring with each bolt of lightning that split the clouds. The sensation unnerved me. It was no longer merely ink on skin, but something deeper, something awake. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the world before me, but the more I resisted, the more insistent it became, like a whisper behind every thought. You are not alone. You are not finished. At the city's edge, we reached a platform that jutted into open air, its surface carved with symbols that pulsed faintly under the storm's light. From here, the land stretched outward in fractured plains and jagged ridges, each marked by scars of old battles. Fires burned in the distance, too steady to be lightning strikes, and the faint silhouettes of moving ships traced patterns across the horizon. The galaxy was not waiting idly for us. It was already in motion, already shifting in response to what had been awakened. The tribunal's emissary, a figure draped in shimmering silver, joined us at the platform. Its voice carried over the thunder, calm and deliberate. The spiral has revealed itself, and now the stars listen. Some will come to kneel. More will come with blades. You must decide whether to meet them as prisoner or sovereign. The words churned in my chest. I had never sought to be either. My life before this had been marked by survival, not command. Yet every step since the guards had first dragged me through their living fortress had pushed me toward something larger, something inescapable. The scarred warrior seemed to sense the weight of my hesitation. He placed a hand on my shoulder, not gentle, but grounding. Choice is a weapon they cannot take from you, he said. Use it before they shape it for you. His presence was steady, but his loyalty remained a labyrinth. Did he stand with me because he believed in me, or because he believed in the spiral that marked my flesh? The distinction mattered more than I wanted to admit. As the storm thrashed overhead, a sound rose from below the cliffs, low, mechanical, growing louder. I leaned forward, straining to see through the sheets of rain. Ships, dozens of them, broke through the haze, their forms sleek and sharp like blades forged for war. They carried no banners, but their formation spoke of discipline, and their weapons glowed with ominous light. Whoever they were, they had come prepared for more than a conversation. The platform erupted with movement. Guards barked orders, soldiers rushed to defensive positions, and the emissary raised its arms in a ritual gesture that called the city itself to life. The towers groaned as if waking from slumber, channels of light igniting along their ridges until the whole skyline blazed like a constellation anchored to the ground. I felt the eyes on me again, hundreds of them waiting, needing, demanding. My pulse thundered with the same rhythm as the storm, and for the first time I understood that indecision was as dangerous as surrender. If I faltered now, if I shrank from the role thrust upon me, everything, the fragile unity, the scarred warrior's faith, the whispered promise of survival, would unravel. I stepped forward, closer to the platform's edge, the rain cold against my skin. If they've come for war, then let them see you there fighting, I said, my voice louder than I expected, steady despite the tremor inside. But if they've come to listen, then let them hear that we will not bow. Not to fear, not to chains, not again. The words were raw, imperfect, but they struck like sparks in dry kindling. A cheer rose from some of the soldiers, while others raised their weapons with renewed resolve. Even the scarred warrior allowed himself a small nod, approval hidden in the set of his jaw. The first of the ships descended, its engines shrieking as it broke through the storm clouds. The platform trembled under the force of its landing, and the hiss of pressurized doors filled the air. From the vessel emerged figures clad in dark armor, their helmets featureless, their movements precise. They carried no visible insignia, but the way the emissary stiffened told me all I needed to know. These were not allies. The leader of the newcomers stepped forward, a towering presence whose armor bore the faint etchings of runes I did not recognize. Its voice was amplified, cutting through storm and chaos alike. The spiral has no claim here. Hand over the bearer, and we will spare your city. The silence that followed was suffocating. Every heartbeat stretched into eternity as the eyes of my unlikely allies turned to me. The scarred warrior's hand shifted closer to his weapon, ready to act, but waiting for my word. And in that unbearable pause, the spiral at my neck flared like fire, searing against my skin as though it could feel the threat before me. The warmth spread through my veins, filling me with a strength that was not wholly my own. My fear did not vanish, but it was drowned beneath something sharper, something undeniable. I stepped forward until I stood at the very edge of the platform, rain plastering my hair to my face, lightning burning the sky into white flame. "If you came and take me," I called out, my voice carrying on the storm, "then know this, I am not yours to claim. I am not your prisoner. I am not your prophecy. I am the choice you feared we would make, the choice to rise." The words left my lips like a blade drawn from its sheath, and for a breathless moment even the storm seemed to hold itself still. The leader tilted its head slightly, as though measuring me anew, while the scarred warrior's grip on his weapon eased, replaced with something like pride. The clash had not yet begun, but the lines had been drawn. The galaxy had arrived at my doorstep, demanding surrender, and I had given them only defiance. And though the storm raged on, I felt clarity cut through its chaos. The true conflict was no longer about surviving captivity. It was about surviving what came after, when every star and every throne would decide what to do with the spiral reborn.